Imagine a mind so powerful that it invented the world's first mechanical calculator at just 19 years old. A mind that mastered geometry as a child, mapped the laws of atmospheric pressure, and laid the foundations of modern probability theory. This was a man who stared into the infinite void of the cosmos and felt a chilling terror, yet possessed the intellect to measure it. His name was Blaise Pascal. To the scientific world, he was a towering titan of the Enlightenment, a genius ahead of his time, whose formulas continue to govern our technology today. But history often hides a much darker and more disturbing truth. At the absolute apex of his intellectual powers, this master of cold, hard logic did the unthinkable. He walked away from science entirely. He burned his bridges, abandoned his equations, and plunged headfirst into the terrifying abyss of religious fanaticism. What could drive one of the greatest scientific minds in human history to abandon reason? What did he see in the shadows of the universe that frightened him so much? Tonight, we uncover the harrowing story of a genius who tried to calculate the cosmos, only to end up begging for the mercy of God. To understand the tragic brilliance of Blaise Pascal, we must go back to the beginning, to a childhood stripped of normalcy and fueled by an obsessive quest for knowledge. Born in France in 1623, Blaise was a fragile and sickly child. His mother passed away when he was just 3 years old, leaving his education entirely in the hands of his father Etienne, a wealthy tax collector and a man of immense intellect. Etienne held unorthodox views on education, fearing that the intense, rigid nature of mathematics would ruin his son's health and overload his fragile mind. He banned the subject from the house entirely. All math books were locked away. Blaise was forbidden from even talking about numbers until he turned 15. But genius cannot be caged. The restriction only fueled a burning, obsessive curiosity in the young boy's mind. In secret, using nothing more than pieces of charcoal on the cold stone floors of his playroom, 12-year-old Blaise began to invent his own mathematical language. Without a single textbook, he independently discovered the 30-second proposition of Euclid's elements. When his father walked into the room and found his young, fragile son surrounded by complex geometric proofs drawn on the floor, he didn't scold him. He wept. Recognizing the terrifying magnitude of his son's intellect, Etienne unlocked his library. By the age of 16, Blaise Pascal had written a treatise on conic sections so advanced that the great philosopher René Descartes refused to believe a teenager had written it, dismissing it as the work of the father. But Pascal's mind was restless, always searching for practical solutions to real-world suffering. Seeing his father exhausted and overwhelmed by nights of endless, grueling tax calculations, 19-year-old Blaise set out to build the impossible. For 3 agonizing years, he designed, failed, and redesigned until he succeeded in creating the Pascaline. It was the world's first working mechanical calculator, an incredibly intricate masterpiece of brass gears and wheels that could add and subtract. Blaise Pascal had not merely solved a mathematical problem. He had created the ancestor of the modern computer. He was hailed as the savior of human labor, a young god of the new scientific age. Yet, as his fame grew, so did a deep, desolate void within him. Pascal began to realize that science and mathematics, no matter how precise, had a limit. They could explain how a machine worked, but they could never explain why the human soul ached. His research shifted from the tangible gears of calculators to the invisible forces of nature. He became obsessed with the concept of the vacuum, absolute nothingness. In his famous barometer experiments on the mountain peaks of France, Pascal proved that nature did not abhor a vacuum, as ancient philosophers claimed. He proved that atmospheric pressure was real, and that beyond our atmosphere stretched a silent, terrifying void. This discovery changed him. It wasn't just a scientific breakthrough, it was a psychological trauma. Pascal looked up at the night sky and didn't just see stars, he saw an infinite, indifferent emptiness. He wrote words that still echo with existential dread. The eternal silence of these infinite spaces terrifies me. He began to view humanity as a fragile reed, the weakest thing in nature, suspended precariously between two terrifying infinities, the infinitely large universe and the infinitely small atom. He realized that all of human civilization was merely a desperate attempt to distract ourselves from our own insignificance. We invent games, chase wealth, seek fame, all to avoid sitting quietly in a room alone with our thoughts. Because when we are alone, we are forced to face the terrifying truth of our mortality. Then, on a frigid November night in 1654, the universe answered him. Pascal was traveling in a carriage across a bridge in Paris during a violent storm. Suddenly, the horses spooked, reared up, and plunged over the edge into the icy river. Miraculously, the carriage snagged on the brink, dangling over a precipice of certain death. Pascal was rescued, but that brush with death fractured something deep within his psyche. He didn't see it as a mere accident. He saw it as a direct warning from the Almighty. That very same month, on the night of November 23rd, Pascal experienced what historians call his night of fire. For over 2 hours, from late evening until past midnight, the cold scientist was consumed by a blinding, overwhelming mystical vision. We know exactly what happened because Pascal wrote it down on a piece of parchment that he secretly sewed into the lining of his coat, carrying it next to his heart for the rest of his life, discovered only after his death. The note read, "Fire, God of Abraham, God of Isaac, God of Jacob, not of the philosophers and the scientists, certainty, certainty, feeling, joy, peace, forgetfulness of the world and of everything except God. He is to be found only by the ways taught in the gospel." When Pascal woke up the next morning, the scientist was gone. The man of logic had been utterly consumed by the flames of faith. He abandoned his mathematical studies, turned his back on Parisian high society, and retreated to an austere Jansenist monastery. He traded the pursuit of earthly glory for absolute asceticism, punishing his already fragile body, wearing an iron-spiked belt that he would press into his flesh whenever he felt a vain thought enter his mind. It was during these final, agonizing years of sickness and isolation that Pascal formulated his most famous and controversial legacy, Pascal's wager. He applied the cold, calculating laws of probability, which he himself had helped create, to the ultimate question of human existence. Does God exist? Pascal argued that since reason can neither definitively prove nor disprove the existence of God, human beings must make a wager. It is a game of chance where you must stake your life on one of two options. If you wager that God exists and live a virtuous life, and it turns out you are right, your gain is infinite, eternal happiness in heaven. If you are wrong, you lose nothing more than a few fleeting, worldly pleasures. However, if you wager that God does not exist and live a life of sin, and it turns out you are wrong, your loss is infinite, eternal damnation. Therefore, Pascal concluded, the only mathematically logical choice is to wager your life on God. It was a terrifyingly rational defense of the irrational. Pascal's health deteriorated rapidly. He suffered from severe stomach ulcers, constant migraines, and a neurological disorder that left him partially paralyzed. Yet, in his agonizing pain, he rejected medical comforts, believing that suffering purified the soul. He died in 1662 at the tragically young age of 39. His last words were a desperate plea, "May God never abandon me." Blaise Pascal began his life trying to conquer the universe with the power of human reason, believing that numbers could solve any mystery. But in the end, the colossal scale of the cosmos broke him. He realized that the human mind, no matter how brilliant, is merely a tiny spark in a vast and terrifying darkness. He surrendered his genius not out of weakness, but out of a profound and overwhelming awe of the unknown. He chose the certainty of faith over the agonizing doubts of science. Whether you view his final years as a tragic descent into religious madness or as the ultimate enlightenment of a soul finding its creator, one thing remains undeniable. Blaise Pascal proved that even the most powerful minds on earth must, sooner or later, bow before the beautiful and terrifying mysteries of existence. If this journey into the past has captivated you, don't forget to leave a like. It's the best way to support this project and keep history alive. To continue unraveling the mysteries of the most fascinating figures who ever walked this earth, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. That way, you won't miss our next trip through time. Until next time.